So good evening again, everyone. We will be in Genesis 16. I do appreciate everyone being here, giving me a chance to speak to you. So let's just, let's look at this here. This chapter, we could give it probably a lot of different titles, but I'm going with The God Who Sees Me, El Roy, and I'm not pronouncing that 100% right, but this is one of the names of God, and this is what Hagar calls God when the angel of the Lord comes to her. So this chapter is about Hagar and Ishmael. It's also about patience, God's timing, and following his plan and not following our own. And it's also about, as always, God's love and mercy and kindness. Now this image here is of what they call the Helix Nebula, if you want to know that. Some call it the Eye of God. Now, ever since I first saw this picture, this image of this, you know how and let's see, it's in Genesis 1, verse 14, God says the lights in the heavens are for signs. Well, that doesn't mean they all have to be for navigation, right? So this is a sign for us, in my mind. You don't have to agree with me, that's okay. That God is always watching over us. He's always looking out for us. That's why it has this appearance of an eye looking into the universe. That's my belief and thought. You don't have to take that. But that's my way of looking at it. It is a sign. It's a simple message, a simple reminder to us that there is God and he is looking over us. That's me. Now, we're going to get into Genesis chapter 16. Abram is about 85 years old. Sarah is about 75. And they've been here in Hebron, or in Canaan at least, about 10 years. So that's where we're going here. So let's look here at the map, which I should have mentioned that before. But I just circled where Hebron is. I don't know if you can see that very good. I apologize. That's a little better, but nonetheless, my sketchy red circle, but it's there, so you can see Hebron's in there, and Mamre, where he stayed near the that grove of trees, if you remember that. Okay, so let's move on to our first couple of verses in Genesis chapter 16. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarah said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarah. Now Hagar is one of the Egyptian servants given to Abram when he was leaving Egypt, if you remember where he got into trouble there, and that they had given him stuff and they let him keep all that he had. And Hagar was one of those servants. Now, when we look at these verses, especially verse 2, if we look at this, we're going to see, at least three problems here. First, Sarah is saying the Lord has restrained her. We don't see any evidence of that. We don't see any mention of the Lord actually restraining her from bearing children. So we don't know what her problem is, if it's just the way she was born or if there's some issue, whatever it is. But she's blaming the Lord that she's not conceiving. Again, we don't see that. Also, to be fair to her, though, it's been 10 years. When God makes a promise to us, don't we always expect it sooner than 10 years? I think we do. So I'm trying to, see both sides of this in a way, but she's kind of losing her faith, losing her trust in God. That's what we're going to see here. But I can understand and sympathize with her because it's been 10 years and she's not getting any younger. She's already 75. So that's a big deal. So she's going to move from waiting on the Lord and following his plan to trying to help God, trying to use or have her own plan. And we need to always remember that God doesn't need our help in that area. We need to follow his plan and what he's told us, not create our own plan. Like we could say, well, Jesus is taking too long to come back, man. We got to find another way. Well, there is no other way. God's plan is the way, right? So it's kind of like that. Now, second, we see that she says, well, I shall obtain children by Hagar, right? But the problem with that was Hagar involved in God's promise to Abram? Hagar was not there, or Hagar. I keep saying it Hagar, so hopefully that's okay. Anyway, she was not a part of their life until they came out of Egypt. God had already given Abram the promise. And we have to remember the way God looks at marriage. Abram and Sarah were married, so they are one. And when God is making this promise to Abram, he's including Sarah as a part of that. And again, in a future chapter, God is going to be very plain about that it's Sarah who will have Isaac, not someone else. So we want to remember that. Again, like I said, she's kind of losing faith in this promise because it's been so long. And then third, Abram listened to Sarah over God. And I'm going to compare this back to Adam and Eve. Adam is more to blame than Eve. All he had to do was say, no, we're going to follow what God has told us and not partake. That's all he had to do. And he did not do that. That's all Abram has to do. He just has to say, no, I'm going to follow what God has told me. We're going to do that. We're going to wait on God. That's all he had to do. So in a way, I understand that it's Sarah's idea, and she instigated this, and we'll get into that a little later, but Abram is primarily to blame because he goes along with it, and he shouldn't have. So it's very, very simple. When we know what God has told us to do, when we read the Bible and we see something obvious that he's telling us to do, we should do that, whatever that is. Not let someone else talk us into trying to get around it or change it and do something else. No, we should be following what the Lord is telling us. Because we'll never be wrong following the Lord. But when we start following our own plans and our own ideas, then we get into a lot of trouble. Let's see. And right, if you do get into trouble, you want to get into trouble like Peter talks about in one of his epistles. You want to get in trouble for following the Lord, for doing the right things, not for doing the wrong things. So if we look at verses 3 and 4, then Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. So we see Sarah is going to follow through with her plan. Abram goes along with the plan, right? Now, again, understandably, it's been 10 years. I know that it's hard for us to be patient for that length of time. So they're following Sarah's plan now and not God's plan. You know, was Abram even supposed to have another wife? Not that we see in what God told him. It's everything is him and Sarah. So was this God's plan they're following? No, they're following Sarah's plan. And a human plan is always going to have trouble, especially when you're trying to go against God's plan with it. And you see the immediate result here. There's conflict, there's rivalry. Hagar now kind of despises Sarah. Now, especially in those days and in that culture, and even in some cultures today, a woman's self-worth and pride is tied up in having children, and especially back then, producing an heir, that type of thing. And when multiple wives are introduced, it's kind of like we see with Jacob and Leah and Rachel, how they're so competitive and all that. It just causes a lot of problems. But anyway, so here, Hagar is kind of puffing herself up. Well, I've conceived. I have a child, and you've never bore a child, right? So she's kind of proud of herself, and she is thinking less of Sarah because of that. Now she has that. And because there's two wives, a lot of times in these cultures where they have multiple wives, there's a pecking order. Usually the first wife would be the head wife or the boss wife or whatever you want to call it. But if she does not produce children or an heir, she could easily be demoted. Now, I don't know for sure in their culture how they looked at that in this instance, but I know that there are cultures like that. So that could be an issue here. Maybe Hagar felt like she should be the primary wife now because she's got what she considers to be the heir. Now, at this point, she doesn't know she has a son, but nonetheless, nonetheless, she's having a child for Abram. So she would consider herself to be above Sarah. Okay, so again, this strife is created by not following God's plan. This is starting some drama here that's going to be a problem, and it's all because they're not following God's plan. They're trying to follow their own plan. They're trying to help God. Even if their intention is good, they're just going about it wrong. So we have to watch ourselves for things like that and make sure that we are actually following God's plan and His ways and not doing things the way we want to do them. So if we look at verses 5 and 6, then Sarah said to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when you saw that she had..." No, I'm sorry. Let me do that again. "I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abram said to Sarah, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." And when Sarah dealt harshly with her with Hagar, she fled, that's Hagar fled, from her presence. So Hagar's fleeing from Sarah. Right away, there's a number of problems here. Sarah is blaming Abram for her plan having unintended consequences, right? I'm mad because I'm receiving the consequences of my actions, right? I mean, that's the way it is, and this is not a good thing. So she's got this attitude that the wrong that's happening to her is his fault. She's basically just blaming Abram. And like I said, now to some degree, he's the husband, and I think he did wrong, and this shouldn't be happening. But she instigated it. She started it. This was her idea. So, and we'll notice something here too. When we get down to, so then she blames him, but then she also says, "The Lord judge between you and me." I would be terrified to say that in this instance, because here I've created this idea and this problem, and now I'm saying it's your fault, and I want the Lord to judge between us. That doesn't sound like that's going to go well, right? But of course, we know that the Lord's not going to do anything harsh to them. But nonetheless, I'm just saying that's something that we should be aware of when we are actually the initiator, when we're the instigator, we're the problem. We need to be able to admit, I messed up, right? I did something wrong, and I've caused this problem, this mess. We need to be able to do that. Can be hard sometimes, and maybe we do have an angry reaction sometimes, but we need to be able to, kind of take a step back and calm down and do that. So then, after that, you'll notice how Abram deals with Sarah. He's got a mad wife. And like so many husbands, when their wife is mad, they're like, "Whoa, just whatever you want then. Okay, go ahead. I don't want to deal with you. Just," he takes the easy way out. He says, "Yeah, she's in your hand. Take care of it." So he doesn't, try to do anything different. I just feel like that's the wrong way to handle that. I think most of us would have to agree. I mean, he still cooperated with this. She's with child because of him. So, this shouldn't have been his answer. That's what I'm getting at. But then Sarah dealt harshly with Hagar, like the scripture says. She treated her badly. Now, think about why she's treating her badly. I had an idea. I had a plan. I instituted the plan. It worked. Now I don't like it, and I'm treating you bad, right? this happens in life. I understand, but we've got to do better than this, right? We can't be doing that. When it's our fault, we need to take responsibility for that and do the right thing, which would not be to treat her harshly and kick her out. Now, you can correct her. She's your servant, right? You can correct her. But nonetheless, this is only happening because they tried to supersede God's plan. They're trying to override God's plan with their own idea, with Sarah's own idea. So we don't want to be doing that ever. Now, I do want us to realize, too, that Hagar's not innocent, right? She's not innocent in this. She is their servant, their bond servant or slave, if you want to say that. So when you work for someone, you don't get to puff yourself up and make yourself out to be better than them, right? So because in this relationship, she is the servant, even though I know that it mentions like she's a wife and stuff, but she's really not. It's another reason Abram reacts the way he does. He's an old guy. He's had Sarah for years, decades, right? He hardly knows this other girl. That's who he loves. He stayed with her even though she never had children all this time. And in their culture, that probably didn't happen a lot because they were looking to be fruitful and multiply. And that's the way that is. And a lot of times, a woman who could not produce children would have been, what would you call it? Maybe just pushed to the side. There's probably a better word for it. I'm not getting it right now. But, she would be kind of put out or pushed to the side. And that's the way they would have done a lot of times. But Hagar gets all full of herself. She needed to stay humble, not get the big head. But because she could have children, obviously, and Sarah could not, she thought of herself as better. And she got to where she was looking down on Sarah, not valuing her at all and despising her, again, in a competitive way, thinking that she should probably be the main wife. So many times we see people put down other people for things they can't help. Like when you're born, you're just born the way you are. Sarah couldn't have children. Some people might be born and they're never going to be as fast as someone else. They're never going to be as agile as someone else. They're never going to be as strong. They're never going to be as smart. And you may be smarter than some people, but there's always someone smarter than yourself. You may be stronger than some people, but that money, you're probably going to run into somebody that's stronger than you at some point. So we have to keep humble. We have to remember not to think badly of other people just because they can't do something that you can do, right? So we all have our skills, our talents that God gives us. And just because he's given me a certain talent, and let's say you can't do that, that doesn't make me better than you, just different. Because you probably have some talent that I have no clue on, and that's the way life is. So again, we don't want to let our pride in our God-given abilities make us think worse of other people. Instead, we should be thanking God for those abilities. Now, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarah. So first off, let's look at the map for a second to get an idea of where we are and where she's come from and where she's going, because she doesn't answer that question, you'll notice. Anyway, Abram and them are still up in Hebron, that Mamre area, Hebron, and she is leaving and heading southwest, and you'll notice the way of Shur, it goes through the southern part of Israel called the Negev, and she's heading to Egypt. Most likely, she's thinking, I'm going back home. Most likely. Doesn't say that, but that's the way she's heading. And that's just a general idea of where she was. I don't know the exact area, the exact place any closer than that. So she's fleeing toward Egypt. Again, that seems to me that she'd be thinking of going back home, back to Egypt, where she came from. All right. So notice the angel of the Lord found her. Well, that means he was looking for her. He was sent to find her, right? He's the angel of the Lord. Now, there is some speculation about the angel of the Lord possibly being Jesus. We might see a little bit of that here. I'm not too concerned about that. I've heard some good information on that, and it sounds reasonable at times, but I don't know for sure. And I'm just going to go with what we're looking at in the scriptures here, the angel of the Lord. But it could be. I've heard somebody make a pretty good case for these instances of the angel of the Lord actually being Jesus. But anyway, so then notice he calls her Sarah's maid. She still should be with Sarah, and we're going to get to that. But he calls her Sarah's maid. She's a part of Abram and Sarah's life. So he asks, where have you come from? Where are you going? She doesn't really answer that, but she does say that I'm fleeing the presence of my mistress Sarah. Now, if we look at the next verses, 9 and 10, the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. Now, while worded differently, this promise should sound very familiar to you. But first, the angel of the Lord tells her, return to your mistress, submit yourself. In other words, humble yourself, right? Her problem was she got too proud, and he's saying, you need to go back and you need to humble yourself and be with them. And then he gives her this promise, which sounds very much like the promise to Abram, not incomplete, but I will multiply your descendants. And in the Hebrew, he's actually saying, multiplying, I will multiply your seed. So that multiplying, I will multiply, that's why they say exceedingly here. They're trying to get that idea across of like, I'm going to really give you a lot of descendants through this child, right? So that's what he's telling her. And that's very similar to part of the promise to Abram. And of course, this child is Abram's, right? Kind of makes sense. God has already promised that he's going to bless Abram's descendants, and there's going to be a lot of them. So whether this baby was part of the plan or not, doesn't matter. God's going to live up to his part of the bargain, and he's going to do that. That's part of the covenant. Unfortunately, they've involved her in this covenant. She shouldn't have been involved in this covenant with the Lord, but now she kind of is. Not as completely as Abram, but kind of. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael. And I left the little brackets in there. I put that in there. God hears, because that's what that name means. God hears. Because the Lord has heard your affliction. And this kind of implies she has been around Abram and Sarah. This implies that perhaps she was praying. Not 100% sure, but the Lord has heard your affliction. I think for him to hear me, I've got to be saying something, right? At least that's the way I think of it. Now, again, that's an implication. It's not 100% definitive. So if we look at the next verse, and this verse is a description of Ishmael. He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So in the Hebrew, it actually says he will be a wild donkey of a man. And the idea here, he's untamed, right? He's not like civil, very, civil. And he is, so he's not willing to cooperate. And then he is stubborn. Couldn't even remember that word. Okay, anyway. And he's very stubborn. So he's very stubborn about it. And he makes enemies of everyone. He's constantly going to be fighting, or we would think of maybe being at war with people. And that last sentence is a difficult translation. And from looking at the Hebrew, it really looks like what it should say is something along this line. Okay. He shall be living in defiance of all mankind, of all the brethren. This word for brothers is being used in the widest possible sense, meaning all humans, all mankind. So he's going to be fighting everybody, and he's going to live and persist in defiance of everyone else. So this is speaking to his attitude and the way he's going to live and be. So that's how Ishmael is going to be. So if we look at verses 13 and 14, then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees." Now, and I put El Roy there in brackets, but we kind of saw that earlier. But she says, you're El Roy, and that just means you're the God who sees. Now, it's understood. You'll see a lot of people say, the God who sees me. That's perfectly fine because that's understood, that she means you're the God who sees me, right? And then with Ishmael, the implication is you are the God who sees and hears me, right? And then there's going to be another one where it's, it's down here in verse 14. Therefore the well was called Bir Lahai Roy, well of the one who lives and sees me. So she's recognizing God as the living God. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish reading 13. I got distracted. But for she said, have I also here seen him who sees me? And I left in brackets there where one of the words means seen the back of him who sees me, or it could just mean, am I seeing a portion of God in some way? Am I witnessing maybe God's power or whatever? And this is another indication that could be maybe it is Jesus, the Lord, but nonetheless, it doesn't really matter. For our purposes, what's important is that she's recognizing God as the one who sees and hears and is the living God. Okay, and of course it says, observe the well is between Kadesh and Bered, and I don't know where that is, so I'll just let that go. But if we look at verses 15 and 16, and this is the end of our chapter. It's a pretty short chapter. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So now there's about a year past, which, 9 months of pregnancy. Okay, about a year. Not quite, but, with some added time. So all of this drama, all of these issues and things going on here, and the fact that, Ishmael doesn't sound like he's going to be the greatest of descendants to have. I mean, this is all by not following God's plan and trying to override his plan, from the intention maybe of trying to help God, but, God doesn't need that kind of help from us. He needs us to follow him and do what he tells us to do. When we read the Bible and understand what he's telling us to do, that's what we need to be doing, not be trying to override that or get around that, anything like that. And I want to close with this verse here, really Genesis chapter 16, verse 13, just to remind us all, just like he saw Hagar in her affliction, just like he heard her, just like he went to her, God is here for us in that same way. He cares for us. He watches. He listens for us. If we would pray to him, we are in a covenant relationship with God if we are following Jesus. And the Lord, he is always faithful, even when we are not. And that's something that this lesson shows as well. They were not exactly doing the right thing, but he was still faithful to his word and what he has been doing. So God does not abandon them. He actively sought out Hagar in her distress, and God does that for us. So if anyone here, if you need to hear from God, if you need prayers for anything, we would be happy to help you with any of that. If you have any distress or anything that you need prayers for, or that you want to pray to God about, and really, if for any reason you have something you don't want to talk about, you can still pray to God. He's who we would all pray to anyway. So you can pray to God, but having the prayers of the congregation can be a good thing. So I don't want to push you away from that. Instead, if there's anything like that we could help you with, if anyone needed to be baptized, we'd be happy to do that. We just ask that you'd come forward, have a seat in the front as we stand and sing.